Hey, welcome back, AP Government. In this video, we're going to talk about the rest of the notes on the presidency. But before I do so, I want to do a real quick review of what we covered in the last video, because that was a doozy. Covered a lot of big areas of kind of fights that took place with the executive and legislative branch. So let's talk about it. Here's some questions for you. See what you remember from the last one. Remember this one? Last chapter. A committee chair in the House of Representatives is always... what's the answer? That would be C. Yes, a member of the majority party in the chamber. In general, independent regulatory commissions are created primarily for the purpose of, what do you think that one is? Look at your options there. Dot is the right answer. No, I'm just kidding. We'll say it's the last dot, actually. Regulating certain industries to protect the public interest is usually what that's about. Think of like the stock market or the economy, even the media, right? Which of the following is articulated in the War Powers Resolution? I just covered that in the last video, right? So take a look what that is. Yeah, the C is the right answer, right? The president must bring troops home from hostilities within 60 to 90 days unless Congress authorizes or extends that time. And they're usually going to spend money on that, right? Now Congress does what's called an authorization use of force, an AUF. And what an AUF is basically saying, we're not going to actually like declare war. We're just going to agree to fund it for you, right? This is what we did for the war in Iraq, the war on terror. They just got an AUF to basically allow for the president to send troops overseas to deal with Saddam Hussein and, Iraq. And then obviously in Afghanistan, we're still there 20 years later, but they might be coming home. So we'll see. Number 4. Which of the following form an iron triangle? We're going to get into this in the next video. But what do you remember about an iron triangle? Yes, that answer is E, an executive department, congressional committee, or interest group. Good. In general, really important one from this last video. Congress is most likely to defer to the president in the area of A, foreign policy. Remember, he's got executive privilege. Right? He's got the ability to know information that Congress doesn't even know about. He's got the ability to hide information, and then he can release some of that to Congress, but executive privilege is a big part of him kind of having a step over Congress, plus he's commander-in-chief. Okay. All right, last one, or two more, excuse me. When independent regulatory agencies make rules, enforce those rules, and adjudicate disputes arising under those rules, they risk violating the constitutional concept of... this answer is a little tricky. It's going to be D, the separation of powers, right? The executive branch is supposed to enforce the law. They're not supposed to make up the law. They're not supposed to actually like adjudicate or like actually fine you for violating it. But we'll look at, especially with the EPA, this is an organization or an independent agency that has an incredible broad amount of power to basically kind of fill in some of the details. Here's what can happen. Sometimes the devil's not in the details. The devil's in the fact that there are no details, and they give it to these agencies to be able to extend their authority over time, to be able to determine their regulations, to grow and influence. And that's definitely the case with the EPA, as we'll talk about when we get into the bureaucracy a little bit more, okay? All right, last one here. Which of the following is an example of a presidential use of informal powers? What do you think that one is? And look at your options. So Reagan nominating, well, no, he can do that, right? JFK negotiating, no, he can do that. It's a treaty, right? Bill Clinton advocating for public policy reform on his health security express bus. That's kind of odd, right? Let's take a look at the other ones. George W. deploying troops, no, we can do that. And Obama delivering? Nope. So the answer would be C on this one. The idea that, yes, you're not supposed to take on this major policy role, right? Like that's not the job of the president. That's Congress's job. But as we've seen over time, gridlock and partisan division have made Congress as an ineffective ability and power to really pass laws. So the president steps up and does this. Okay, let me give you a few notes on the presidency. Over time, you notice a couple things. Most of the time, presidents are going to end off with a lower approval rating than when they start off. Maybe there's a few exceptions to that. Actually, Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton is going to have this area right in here. Bill Clinton starts here and finishes here. Actually, kind of the impeachment thing kind of helped him. He also had a really strong economy. That's one of the things we could talk about. Economic advantages, if you will. You have a strong economy, you're probably more likely to get reelected. Truman, again, you end a war, you drop a bomb, if you will. That's probably not going to go well for you. So anytime you start a war, like look at Johnson, we look at Truman. Not really he started a war, but again, dropping the bomb wasn't a great start to his presidency. That's going to hurt your presidential rating. Something that can actually help your presidential rating, as we talked about, is going to be an economy, right? So having a strong economy, and avoiding kind of scandals and that kind of thing. A scandal is going to really hurt your presidency. We can take a look at Nixon and then Ford, right? So here's Nixon, and then here's Ford, right? And by the way, Trump is going to be somewhere right around here. He's around like 40% almost all the time. He's barely broken 50%, to put that in perspective. But yeah, if you're going to have controversy, you go through impeachment, usually that hurts your presidency and whatnot. Good economy helps you, okay? And we can see president approval ratings over time and what that looks like. Wartime presidents versus peacetime presidents, I think that kind of speaks for itself, right? If you're going to be at peace, you're going to have a little bit more of a stable approval rating than a wartime president. There's Barack Obama's job approval rating, and I can show you Donald Trump's approval rating, and I'll try to give you an updated picture on that. Okay. Presidential leadership and popularity. So the importance of popularity and high approval ratings, this isn't like the determining factor, but it does it does help to show that people, at least the majority of people are your population, your party supports what you're doing. So there is some importance of approval rating. Factors are likely to improve or reduce approval rating. So I want you to know this term, the honeymoon period. This is usually the first 100 days. And usually within the first 100 days, Congress is more willing to work with you. Think of it like the honeymoon time period, right? The husband, the spouse, or whatever, they are more likely to get along during the honeymoon than maybe afterwards, right? So they call it the honeymoon period because people are more willing to collaborate and work together, okay? The president has the use of the bully pulpit. His ability to put a message out there, have a press conference, tweet, go on the news and talk about his position. Because when the president speaks, people listen, and that comes with a great amount of influence. Obviously, Trump's used the bully pulpit in new ways with Twitter and whatnot, and trying to get around the mainstream media, right, and getting his own message out there. And that's what he's always trying to challenge, is what the media is saying. You do have this thing called like the chief citizen role, and that's them going out, kind of like FDR. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to talk to the American public. I'm going to go out and I'm going to talk to the people. Obama did really well with this with the Affordable Care Act, trying to get that message out there and whatnot. Okay, last little bit here. There's an evolving relationship with Congress. We talked about some of these big ones. The veto, obviously Congress is unlikely to veto. If you remember the percentage, it's less than 3%. Executive privilege, right? So the president has executive privilege. The pushback against that would be U.S. versus Nixon. You can't do it for something that, makes you look guilty in a crime. Impoundment. Again, we said this is a big win for Congress. President can no longer impound funds without congressional approval. In addition, they also have the CBO to give their own estimate, their own economic advisors to kind of balance out the OMB and the president. Okay. Commander-in-Chief, I would still give this one to the presidency with the War Powers Act and whatnot. All right, last little bit here. Presidential succession, this is going to kick in 1947 to say, okay, we've got to have a better process to make sure that we know who's going to take over in case there is some major assassination or there's a major problem. So it goes president, vice president, speaker of the House, president pro temp, and then you go the head of cabinets in order of their creation. So it's kind of odd that the Secretary of Agriculture would become president before the Secretary of Homeland Security, but that's the way that we have it. Order of creation is where you have the line of succession. What's always kind of interesting, when the president does his State of the Union address, there's always one cabinet secretary that's not there. They had a whole show about this, right? Was it Designated Survivor? And he was the guy that was set aside. I think it was like the Housing and Urban Development Secretary, if I remember the show correctly. And he was basically the leader of America after all of Congress, the president, Supreme Court, all that just blew up during the State of the Union address. He was put aside to now be the next leader of America. And of course, that show is very intense when you think about what that would mean. Okay, we got a few amendments in here. We got impeachment. We got Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, add Trump on there now. And Nixon was not impeached. Remember, he resigned, and then Ford pardoned him. Okay, I'm going to leave you with this picture because we're going to look at one more video in this section, this assignment, to get into the bureaucracy, to know the Iron Triangle and the power of the Iron Triangle, which all has to do with this area here. Not all of it. Starts the interest group, but we're going to fill in the bureaucracy side of it in the next video. Okay, thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate it. I got one more video, and then we're done with notes on the executive branch. Hang in there. We'll see you in just a minute or two.